Hello everyone. Today's interview is the first part of the Family FaceTime series. I'll be sitting down with my dad, Aaron Camotes, and asking him to share his story. My dad has lived in San Antonio for the past 2 decades as a property tax appraiser. My dad and I love to talk about music, food, art, and everything else under the sun. We also love to discuss and analyze existing businesses, as well as brainstorm new ones together. So with that being said, let's go ahead and welcome on my dad. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. I can hear you too. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started with the first question. Unless you want to talk about yourself a little bit and give a little bit about what is a property tax appraiser and what you do at your firm.
Sure. So what a property tax consultant is our firm represents property for commercial property owners. We represent commercial property owners, and we're their advocate at the administrative level of the property tax system. So what we do is we file appeals for the owners and try to reduce their values, which essentially reduces their tax. And we do that in a couple of different ways with different tools and techniques. I mentioned the administrative level, that's at the local level with the appraisers and the appraisal district. And then there's a second stage called the litigation stage, which takes place in district court. And that's probably about 45% of my time. So about 45% of my time's consulting at the administrative level, and the other 45% is in district court. I'm not an attorney, but we handle the valuation side. So we consult the attorneys and the owners on the valuation side, and the attorneys file all the legal documents, and we appeal and settle most of our cases before trial. So I've never been involved in a trial, but I've been involved in thousands of lawsuits.
And what is your role exactly? Like, what is your title?
So I'm the Central Texas market leader. So Paradigm Tax has a little bit over 100 people across the country. We represent clients in all 50 states. We have about 13 offices, and I'm the market leader for Central Texas. So we office in San Antonio. I manage the office here in San Antonio, and our territory is essentially from Austin to Brownsville, all the way west to El Paso, and back to Austin. That's our golden triangle.
Cool. So then we'll go ahead and get started with the first question, and let's start all the way from the beginning. What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were little?
I always had a passion for animals. I always had a love for animals. My first pet was a dog when I was about 3. And from there it was hamsters and rabbits and snakes and tarantulas. And I always loved animals. My father's friends and family had horses and cattle. And I always had a passion for animals. And then when I got to high school, that all changed. So literally from 3 years old till 16 years old, I always thought I was going to be a veterinarian. I told family, friends, and relatives when they'd ask me what I want to be when I grow up. My answer from 3 to 16 was I wanted to be a vet.
What changed in high school?
So I actually, my freshman year, the counselors, registering for school, you had to pick electives. And just something sparked my interest with business law and typing and accounting and in general business classes. And my sophomore year, I actually took accounting. My sophomore year, I actually took accounting both semesters, and then business law one semester. And I was changed from that day forward. My accounting class, it really interested me to discuss tax. I don't think I had the ambition of like helping people reduce tax, because that's really what a CPA does, right? He tries to minimize your tax. It's, a lot of people say it's loopholes. A lot of people say, it kind of borders ethics, but I don't think it does. I just think it's a great CPA knows the tax code and knows what a taxpayer should and shouldn't pay in tax. And so that's what I do on property taxes. I know the tax code. There's a valuation side on it as well. And so I know how to value properties pretty well. And it's all about data. So I analyze the data and come up with an expert opinion and create reports. And so going back to high school, the accounting bug really struck me my sophomore year. I took it my junior and senior year. Went to business school, went to UTEP and took a lot of business classes. Accounting classes were extremely tough, but I still had the desire to be an accountant. And so actually through high school, my goal was to be a CPA. I wanted to take my CPA, within 90 days of graduating college. And my ambitions were, to be a CPA, and that all changed.
It's one of our next questions. Not there yet, but so what did you do for fun when you were little? What hobbies did you have?
Hobbies. I played golf. I liked motorcycles. Loved music and movies. Still do. Still love all four of those.
Okay. Can't forget cars.
Yeah, I'm sorry. When I said motorcycles, I should have said anything with a motor.
Basically, right? And so I guess the next question is what you already hinted at was, how did becoming a parent at such a young age affect who you are today?
I think it really matured me really fast. I think I was a really innocent kid one day and woke up the next day having to be an adult. It took a little while, but once my son was born, your brother. Pardon? I'm sorry, I didn't understand you.
Okay, were you a new person?
Oh, absolutely. So the day he was born, it was basically an instant education on being an adult, right. Both naturally and in all ways.
Right. So your early and mid 20s were focused on starting your career and being a parent, and then later in your early 30s, you left El Paso to seek better opportunities, and which is commonly known as brain drain. And so my next question for you is, brain drain is such a prominent issue in the El Paso economy that has affected you personally. What are your ideas for El Paso to solve this problem?
That is a really tough question. So I guess to kind of go back to the, how am I not a CPA? So I basically, right out of high school, the week I graduated high school, two big things happened. I got married. I moved out of my parents' house, and I got a job, and I signed up for summer school. So literally the week after I graduated high school, all of those things kind of took off running. Wasn't really a choice. It was just decisions that were almost obvious that I had to make. I guess the point I'm getting at, so I worked at a golf store. So I worked at a golf store for 7 years. I played high school golf. So I was really blessed that my father taught me golf at a really young age. And that helped me in the golf business because I knew the equipment, I knew how to repair it. And then I learned, and then since we were a retail store, we had to sell it. So it was really a crash course in business because we had to price our equipment, even though it was a franchise actually owned by a couple out of Boston, or the East Coast, I should say. And they retired and moved to El Paso and bought a franchise. But I don't believe they knew how to run a business. Neither did me as an 18-year-old, but my brother actually got me the job there. But they actually gave us the opportunity to make a lot of decisions. So we made decisions on pricing and inventory and marketing. And back then there was no internet. So the way we marketed was with the Yellow Pages, our biggest expense. But after that, it was radio and newspaper. So we would come up with newspaper ads and radio ads. Our boss was actually, the owner of the company actually owned radio stations on the East Coast. So he was heavily involved and really behind the radio marketing, but he gave us the opportunity to come up with the ideas of what we wanted to market and sell to bring people into the store, and then sell the higher profit stuff. So we came up with the ads. He voiced the ads and, set it up with the radio stations. But anyways, spent 7 years at a golf store that taught me a lot about business, especially about the expense side. And I'll never forget, our inventory was about $150,000. And back then we had to pay about a little bit over $2,500 in tax. And one year it jumped up considerably. And so my boss actually drove me to downtown El Paso when the appraisal district was on Ochoa Street, and picked up some tax forms and started the appeal process of how to fight the tax. So it really sparked my interest because, one, that tax liability came out of our profit. And since it was an all of the sudden surprise of what the tax was going to be, we didn't budget for it. So we strategized and planned and kind of learned the property tax system of how to fight that. And so that was my first spark of the interest, or my first spark of interest in the property tax world. Again, it had something to do with tax. It was really interesting. Long story short, the business closed. The profits weren't there. A couple of other franchises moved into El Paso. This was 93 or so. So again, the internet still wasn't there, but there was a lot of competition. And the owners of the company decided it was just a little bit too much work and a little bit more investment, because the next step would have been to basically double the inventory and really step up the product that we were selling. So I stayed with them till the very last day, basically closed the door and found myself without a job. That was a Monday that we closed the door and basically sold everything. Tuesday, find myself without a job. And by that Friday, I was actually extremely worried. I didn't have a job. I had a basically 5-year-old son, and didn't know how I was going to pay for college. So I was really blessed that a friend of your mother's family actually got me an opportunity at the appraisal district, of all places. I had no ambition, no thought of actually going and working at the appraisal district, even though that first protest of our inventory appeal kind of sparked my interest. But a side story is the neighbor across the street from my parents was actually a property tax consultant, very popular, very successful property tax consultant. And I always wondered what he did. I knew he was in tax, but I liked his toys, I liked his house, I liked his lifestyle, so it always sparked my interest. But anyways, your mother's friend, her name is Ruby. Her mother got me a job at the appraisal district, and my life changed from there forward. So I literally started working about a week and a half after I had lost my job at the golf store, and the rest is history. So I spent 7 years there kind of learning. I started as a clerk in the records department. So spent about 3 months there and just tried to learn every single thing that I could soak in. And within 3 months, a supervisor from another department really liked my work ethic, really liked my personality, how I dealt with taxpayers. Because really at the appraisal district, the chief appraiser there, wonderful woman, great lady, great leader, and actually a great friend now. She always tried to share the goal of that the taxpayers were the customer. So it was kind of neat to see the culture of all the employees addressing people as we have a customer at the counter, or there's a customer on the phone. And I really liked that, and I really respected that culture that she created. But anyways, supervisor from another department really liked my ethics and determination and moved me into his department. And the same thing happened in another department, and I became an appraiser. So within 6 months, I became an appraiser, got licensed within a month after that. There's a couple of different levels of licensing. So I became a level 3 appraiser within a couple of years, and you have to wait 4 years to be a level 4 appraiser. So 4 years after that, I got my level 4. And so that's called RPA. That's a registered professional appraiser with the state of Texas. So basically could go to any appraisal district in the state and appraise property for property tax purposes. 2 years after that, I obtained what's called a CTA, which is a certified tax administrator license. So I could have run for office and been the assessor collector for the county of El Paso, which actually sparked a little bit of interest in me once I obtained that license. It's actually extremely hard because for one, you can't just go and take the test and you get licensed. So you have to have your RPA first. So you have to at least complete 4 years at an appraisal district to get the RPA, and then a year after that to study and to complete some courses for the CTA. So 5 years got my CTA, spent the 6th year handling a bunch of really interesting properties for the commercial department at the appraisal district. It's worked on some fun projects. My 7th year, met a guy out of Austin that worked for a company called Deloitte, which at that time was one of the three. It was really the second biggest accounting firm in the world. And I spent 7 days with him going over the properties that he represented for his clients. And I spent 5 days with him. And on the 5th day, he stood up and gave me his business card. So I got the opportunity to work with a guy named Breck Bostwick out of Austin that on the 5th day, he actually stood up and was, going back to Austin after completing the week with me. And he gave me his business card and offered me a job in their San Antonio office. So again, he actually managed the Austin office, but he had an opportunity in San Antonio that he needed somebody to fill a position. And I instantly told him, "Oh, I'm honored, but thank you, but no, thank you." That was about the middle of June. The middle of June 1999, actually. I'm sorry, the middle of June 2000. And so August of 2000, I went to San Antonio for a seminar. So a bunch of people from the appraisal district, there's an association that all the appraisers and the employees belong to. And the seminar so happened to be in San Antonio. So we all drove out to San Antonio in a big caravan. And I fell in love with it. Even though it was hot and humid in August, the golf courses were beautiful. The Riverwalk was kind of cool. The central business district with all the hotels and offices, it was kind of cool. In the meantime, between June and August, I had actually asked a couple of friends, one of them being the neighbor across the street, who by that time had actually moved to another house. But I asked him about the company and that gentleman that I had mentioned. And he said, "Yeah, that's actually a pretty great opportunity that you passed." And so I thought about it a little bit more. And so anyways, go to the seminar like San Antonio, go back to El Paso, and I call him. I call that number on the business card. Really long story short.
After passing it up?
Pardon?
What did he say after you passed it up?
He said, "Well, you're not going to believe this, but that opportunity went away, but another one came back up." So I know that's a really long answer that you basically asked about brain drain, but I will get to it in a couple of seconds. So to kind of end that saga of how I ended up in San Antonio. So he was actually in an automobile accident. So they didn't think he was going to make it. They actually thought he was going to pass away. And so in that meantime, I flew back to Austin for a second interview because they wanted me to take his place in Austin. And so by the time I was moving around, my move-in date, not only to my apartment and to start working at the San Antonio office, was the Monday after Thanksgiving 2000. All that changed within about a 30-day period between going back and forth to Austin of where I was going to office and actually kind of have my responsibilities. So he actually recuperated extremely well within a 30-day period. And so they moved me back to San Antonio. So anyways, I came to San Antonio, officed in San Antonio, did a full complete year of what we call an appeal season in San Antonio. And they decided to close the San Antonio operations and move us to Austin. So Liz and I moved to Austin, and I worked in the Austin market, but I still handled my clients in San Antonio. So from basically November of 2000 until today, I've handled most of my clients in the San Antonio market. so that's how I ended up leaving El Paso. So it wasn't, you know, I packed my bags and just, and seeked an opportunity out here. It was actually presented to me. So to answer your question, I think that happens frequently. And so a lot of offers, the recipient sees the dollar signs, and it's a really easy decision. But I can honestly say that it wasn't about dollar signs. It was just at that point, even though I was 29 years old, I was blessed with the mentality to look 5 to 10 years down the road instead of next month and next week. And so going back to when Andrew was born and how I had to mature overnight, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow anymore. I was thinking about the next month's paycheck, the next month's rent. What was I going to do next year? What goals was I going to set for myself for the next year and 5 years after that? So I think younger employees kind of see those dollar signs, and it's a really easy decision to accept those jobs and move out of El Paso. But I don't think salaries is really the only thing that's draining El Paso or, you know, quote unquote, the brain drain. In fact, I was talking to your uncle last night, and he brought up something that we've talked about many, many, many times. But there's other things besides the brain drain of it being only about money. But that is a huge factor, and I'll end my answer with that. But the location. So El Paso is really distant. It's close to Midland and Odessa, and it's kind of close to Lubbock, but it's not close to the big four. So Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston are basically within that circle. You can get from San Antonio to Houston in 4 hours. You can get to Dallas in about 4 hours. And I used to be able to get to Austin in an hour, but literally I can get to any of those places within 4 hours. And whether if it's for pleasure, for business, or for culture, it's an easy car drive and a really fast plane ride. Whereas El Paso, it's 8 hours away. So the location is kind of it's a tough sell to recruiters. And I've been approached by a lot of recruiters that where either the company head knows that I'm from El Paso, and so they'll tell the recruiter, you know, that I would be a good candidate, but it's just those recruiters have a really hard time recruiting outside of Texas to get people to move to El Paso. And even though the cost of living is fantastic, it's just, I think a lot of recruiters have a big hurdle to overcome to recruit for El Paso. And it's the location, it's the salaries. And then there's another thing that we've talked about quite a bit amongst my brothers and I is the education. So kind of a running joke a little bit is that for many, many years, there's guys and gals with bachelor's degrees in Austin basically waiting tables, because there is such a high level of competition. Of anytime a company opens up a job opening, they get thousands of resumes, and those 1,000 resumes are bachelor's and master's candidates. Bachelor's and master's people that are competing with each other. In El Paso, I think that education level is much lower. And that's the same for San Antonio, that's the same for Houston, and that's the same for Dallas. It's just extremely competitive with the level of education that's in those four cities. El Paso, I think what happens is once students graduate and get the opportunity to have the degrees or they're a little bit more marketable outside of El Paso, even though there's a lot more competition. I think the ambition there is to make more money outside of El Paso. I personally don't think it's all about money. I think it's the quality of life, the location. I mean, even though you can fly out of El Paso or Juarez, it's the airports in San Antonio, Houston, and Austin are actually pretty big, pretty renowned airports that have a lot more flights, a little bit cheaper flights. So how do you solve the brain drain? I think that's the question that El Paso city leaders have been asking themselves for the past 35 years. I know economic development has spent a lot of time and a lot of money on how to fix that. And the solution is not just throwing money, but I mentioned I was going to end that answer with the salaries. I mean, again, one of your uncles had an opportunity to be recruited by a company out of El Paso, and the salary was half, literally one half of what he was making in Phoenix for the same position, for the same expertise, for the same education, for the same experience. It's just, how can you compete with a half salary? It's just, you can't. And so I think, again, when an El Pasoan receives a job offer in their email, and they open it up and see the salary, $20, $40, $50,000 higher than what they're making now, it's like, unfortunately, they leave skid marks sometimes because they want to make that money. Again, I do want to repeat, and I know that sounds repetitious, but I know it's not all about money. That's why I don't think the solution is money. But I know El Paso, the city leaders are trying to build the arena, and the Chihuahua Stadium's fantastic, and I know there's museum plans and things like that, and it'll come. But I just think they have to address those three things. Is, how do you make up for the location? You really can't. So you're going to have to concentrate on the salaries, and you're going to have to concentrate on the education. You got to educate the citizens as much as possible.
But then it's just a vicious cycle of getting educated, graduating, and then leaving.
Yes. So that's the goal, and that's the secret, right? So how do you get those El Pasoans that did graduate? Again, it's a small percentage, but how do you get those El Pasoans to stay? And it's got to be with the salary. Mm-hmm. It's got to be. So unfortunately, that's the short answer, is salary.
And then for my next question, we've had this discussion before, and I think your answer is important. It's not necessarily the right answer, but I think it's an important point of view. So what does it take to build a career like yours when you decided to forego a diploma?
So, ask me that one more time.
So what does it take, the work ethic and long hours, what does it take to build a career like yours, even though you decided not to graduate from UTEP?
Yeah, so I think you already answered it. So it's the grind. I think by not having that degree, I think I had to prove myself to everybody. So obviously the different, I've never had to fill out a resume and file for a job, or go on websites and look for openings. I've always been approached by somebody else. Previous to the job I had, a couple of jobs, I didn't even submit a resume. So literally had lunch with a couple of guys and was hired within 3 or 4 days of having lunch with those guys. So with the company I'm with now, I did have to submit a resume. But what I have done in the past is, in my discussion, is basically performance. So I'm able to, it may sound a little bit like bragging, but to the people that I was speaking with that were hiring me, it wasn't bragging. It was just giving data. It was, how much money I'm saving my clients, which clients I've worked for in the past, the volume of, again, properties are valued. I'm basically fighting the values or discussing the values of properties with the appraiser. So this is all open records information. So you can literally see what clients and what volume of properties and values of properties I represent. And so, again, you kind of answered it in the question that you asked. Is it's just high level of ambition, high level of making goals and trying to reach those goals, not really on a daily basis, but I know it sounds corny, on a quarterly basis, but just reevaluating every 3 to 4 months of what I'm doing. How can I be better? How can I save my clients more money? So, unfortunately, in the corporate world, which I started off at an accounting firm that was the second or third biggest in the world. Unfortunately, in the corporate world, everybody's just a number unless you're a partner. But even partners are graded and critiqued and judged on their numbers. So it's all about numbers, whether if it was how many hours I charged or how much money I billed clients. It was just, those were my measurements. And so by setting those goals and being better than average and being highly ambitious and more ambitious than an average person, it's just those numbers, those results were clearly evident. So fortunately, in the economic downturn, we actually make more money, unfortunately. But before that, I've been through a couple of cycles where there's been big layoffs in my industry, and I've been promoted during those times. So it's, again, I just think being in the 1 percentile in everything that you do just really reaps benefits for everything, whether it's your hobbies, whether it's your dedication to charity, or whether it's your dedication to your job. It's just performing at the highest level of everything that you do kind of helps everything in your life, whether it's making money, whether it's being a good person, or whether it's mentoring a younger employee or a family member. I don't know if I even answered your question, but I just think without having that degree, and I kind of don't care what people think. I know what I went to school and how much time I spent going to school, and spending those 4 years to get my license, spending another 2 years to get the second license. To me, that was a master's program in itself. And even if you don't respect that, working for the second biggest accounting firm in the world, that was my doctorate. I spent 3 years there, or really four appeal seasons there. That was my doctorate. I represented the biggest clients in the world, with the biggest, what we call trophy clients, with the biggest office building owners, apartment owners, shopping center owners, and warehouse owners. To me, that was my doctorate. Spent 4 years with Deloitte. Then I went to another company. I was recruited by another company that's not the biggest accounting firm in the world, but it was the biggest privately owned company in my industry. I was recruited by them, and spent 4 years working for them. So again, you could say, even though I don't have that degree, I spent more than 7 years working at the highest level of property owners. And I think my numbers kind of speak for themselves. And so really that's really the only way you can kind of prove yourself right, is performance. You can brag and talk all you want, but if the numbers are there, that's why I go back to the corporate world. Unfortunately, corporations, when they make decisions, it's based on black and white numbers. And I'm fortunate to say that I've always been at the top.
That's kind of the answer that, not that I was looking for, but I think is important to hear, just because in today's society, a piece of paper is so important, like you said, because thousands and thousands of people are constantly applying for new jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
The competition is really heavy and intense. You answered my next question, so I'm just going to skip that one. What does being an entrepreneur mean to you?
Oh, it means everything. Even though I've been in the corporate world since 2000, I still, even working for let me back up a second. So it's very important, because I've had the ambition, or at least the goal or the mindset, that every company I've worked for, starting off with that family-owned company, every company I've worked for, I've tried to behave in the manner that this is my own company. So the decisions I make on the selling side of what I'm going to charge clients, to the expense side of what it takes for me to do my business, whether it's travel, airlines, hotels, meals, marketing, entertainment, things like that. I try to behave like it is my company. And that's just the entrepreneurial spirit, to try to make a profit, right? To not just collect a paycheck, but to have ambition, to run a company as if I do. And that really paid off a few years ago, because now I do kind of manage my own profit center. And by behaving in that manner as an entrepreneur, I just think, again, it just kind of it kind of births great things, right? So you're going to be more sensible about your profit. You're going to be more cautious for your expenses. Any kind of marketing is just going to grow your revenue. So it's important because, both my grandparents, my father's father, even though he was a doctor, once he came back from World War II, he actually had his own practice. So in a sense, he was an entrepreneur by having his own practice. My other grandfather on my mother's side has basically been in the auto body business since the 40s and had been his own boss, so to speak, since the 40s. And basically in the 80s, he was the top guy in El Paso. I mean, nobody fixed or repaired more cars than he did, and just had a tremendous career as an entrepreneur, raised many children and did really well for himself. My father, even though he's worked for corporations, big corporations, Mobil Oil, El Paso Natural Gas, even though those were really big corporations, he always had side jobs, whether it was a licensed real estate agent or whether it was his consulting firm on the engineering side. He always had second jobs. And in fact, he even had third jobs because he was actually teaching part-time since before I can remember. He taught at the community college. I'd go with him to night school in the evenings to Bel Air High School. So he always had second and third jobs. Like we called them second and third gigs at all times. He never, ever just collected one check and moved on. Now my mother, again, she, when my brother went to elementary school, she became the licensed real estate agent. A few years later, became a broker and has had her own business since then. Since essentially the 80s, she's been a broker. So the entrepreneur spirit's pretty strong in our family. Even though myself and my two brothers aren't entrepreneurs, we've definitely got that blood and we've got the spirit of being an entrepreneur. And who knows, maybe next month I'll open my own and represent my own clients. But I love what I do. I love working for a big company. Who knows what the future will hold?
And that's my next question is, you've always had creative and entrepreneurial ideas. What has kept you from doing the hustle, getting a side gig?
That's so the side gigs, I've had a lot of ideas for side gigs, but most of them, all of them didn't have anything to do with property tax. They either had to do with real estate, either on the rental side or the flipping side, or it had to do with motorcycles and cars, buying and selling motorcycles and cars, or it's and so to answer your question, what's kept me, unfortunately, is my passion for what I do for a living. So I don't see it as a job. It's truly as a passion. So any spare time that I do have, I don't have the desire to make money. I just really have the desire to just kind of decompress. Mm-hmm. I know that sounds really crazy, but when I'm not at the office, I don't want to think about making money. And so buying and selling cars or buying and selling real estate really wouldn't be a job. It would be a passion. But I just, right now, even though I'm 50, I haven't jumped to that next level. But I've been approached by a couple of friends that have really enticed me to go into some other fields and to go into some other businesses. But just that, I just want to keep that high level of commitment to the job that I have now. Who knows what the future will hold?
You never know. One thing from the next, you could decide that, hey, you're 50, you got 50 more years.
Yep.
Never too late. Okay, so what do you love most about El Paso?
I love the culture. I love that El Pasoans have the reputation of being kind and nice people and cheerful people. I love that. I think that is so amazing. Not that I've traveled the world or really traveled the country, but I have been to other cities where people are very rude. And I've had a lot of people actually tell me that they visited El Paso or they know people from El Paso and they're the nicest people. And boy, that makes me proud to be from El Paso, born and raised. I love it. I think the second thing is the food. You can't compare the food.
All the time.
Pardon?
Chicos all the time.
A little bit. And I guess the last thing that I miss about El Paso, of course, family. I'm not, you can't even mention that because that's a given. But I love the desert, especially the desert rains in the summer. There's nothing like it. The smell, the scenery, the flowers. It's beautiful. I love it. I'd wish I could go back and move and live there. Maybe I will. But that's really what I love, the culture, the food, the desert. It'll always be in my blood. That's why we go back as often as we can.
And what do you think people tend to get wrong about El Paso when El Paso wins?
Ooh, that's a tough one. A lot of racist stuff, unfortunately, but I think they get a lot of things that they get wrong. They think it's small. They think it's as like a cattle city or a kind of like an industrial city. Repeat that again.
Everyone's riding around on horses.
Not really on horses, but they just don't see it as a city. Like they have no clue how big Fort Bliss is and how critical the maquila industry is. And I think a lot of people get it wrong that it's small. It's actually not small. I mean, the population is a pretty big population. The size of it, as far as acreage and square miles, it's actually pretty big. An incredible an incredible industry of manufacturing and warehousing. I mean, it's a significantly sized city. I mean, you and I had talked before about, how it probably should have been bigger than San Antonio in the early 80s, late 70s. My father has some ideas about why it wasn't, but it should have surpassed Austin and San Antonio as far as population and gross domestic product and things like that. But that's what a lot of people get wrong about El Paso. They think it's a podunk town, and it's not. It's a big city. It's a big city with a little name.
Before my last question, I wanted to ask you if you consider yourself a feminist, just because when I was growing up, especially having an older brother, I was never treated like I could only do girl things and he could only do the boy things with you. We always did everything together as a family. And I guess I never knew that people or girls were treated differently until I went to college and and experienced the real world that women have a hard time, just because I was constantly surrounded by strong, independent women and men who upheld that ideology.
Sure. So that's a tough question because El Paso's Hispanic culture is extremely thick, right? So and what I mean by that is the Mexican culture really is a machismo culture, and the men kind of make the decisions and the men kind of rule the castle. But I think my father did that to some extent, but I don't think he preached that to myself and my two brothers. I don't think we, because I have witnessed that machismo culture before, and that was not my family. I don't think. There's little things, small innocent things, but not the drastic, overpowering, overbearing machismo culture that I witnessed firsthand when I would go to Mexico City every summer. When I was about 7 years old till I was about 15 years old, I'd go to Mexico City every summer for about 5 to 6 weeks, and I witnessed it daily there. And so to answer your question, yeah, I definitely think I am a feminist. It wasn't preached upon me to be a macho. I wasn't taught to be a machismo husband or father. I wasn't asked or pressured to teach my children about that culture. So I think it's great, that I didn't fall victim to that.
Mm-hmm. We also kind of talked about respecting your mom. It's common in Mexican cultures for the sons to worship their mom. but you were taught to not only worship your mom, but respect your mom as an individual.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's nobody else on earth like a mother, right? So I think my I learned my business drive and my ethics from both my parents, but I think I learned my compassion from my mother. I learned my respect from both parents, but my mom taught me to be compassionate, to be kind, um, yeah, to be a good person, basically.
Mhm. Okay, and then the last question to wrap this all up is always my favorite question to ask in interviews is if you could talk to younger you, what advice would you give him? Any age, doesn't matter.
Any age, any age. I would probably say I should have gone after that CPA. I have zero regrets, but to answer your question, what would I tell my younger self? I think I would have gotten that degree. I would have loved to have been an attorney. I don't think there's any in the business world. I don't think there's anybody more powerful than a CPA that also has a license to practice law. I think the second thing, again, no regrets. It would just be something simple that if I could tap myself on the shoulder when I was 12 and say, hey, become a lawyer, become a CPA, and you'll be the most powerful guy in business. But I think the other thing is maybe save a little bit more money.
Save money.
Save.
Save. It's important for the quarantine right now, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for you. Did you want to add anything else?
No, I think you covered everything. Hope I didn't talk too much, but those are some pretty deep questions, especially about the brain drain. I think there's going to be white papers written on that for the next few decades until that problem's solved. But El Paso is a beautiful place. If I was a recruiter, I think I could recruit a lot of people to accept high-level positions in El Paso. But I think that first thing as part of the recruitment toolbox has got to be salary. El Pasoans have got to bump up salaries, whether it's charging their own clients or charging the services that they do produce. Because let me tell you, the service in El Paso is not inferior. So if you're an attorney or a CPA and you're charging $100 and $150, I know attorneys, I know CPAs that their service isn't a third or a half of what they are in Austin and San Antonio. So charge clients more because your service is worth it. The theory of supply and demand is going to work itself out. If you're overpriced, but you will have clients that will have value in what you're serving them. So it's got to start somewhere, whether increasing fees, prices, service fees, things like that. Then the salaries will come.
Yeah, so in the end, know your worth.
Absolutely. Know your worth.
All right. I'll go ahead and talk to you later then.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Love you. Of
Love
course.
you too.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Or does it